A 15-year-old girl is standing in her neighbor's front yard, watering flowers in the middle of a bright summer afternoon. The sun is high. The neighborhood is quiet. The kind of street where you know every house, every face, every car that belongs there. She is doing something ordinary and kind, tending to someone else's garden while they are away. There is no reason to be afraid. There is no reason to be on guard. This is the kind of afternoon that you forget about by evening because nothing happened. Except that on this day, something did happen. A man walked up behind her, and before she could turn around, before she could scream, before she could even process what was happening, she felt the hard, cold barrel of a gun press against the back of her neck. A voice, low and controlled, telling her not to make a sound, telling her she would be fine if she just listened. And then a large plastic storage container, the kind you keep in a garage or a closet, the kind that holds holiday decorations or old clothes, was pushed in front of her. She was forced inside it. The lid snapped shut. The world went dark, and she was loaded into the back of a van that pulled away from that quiet neighborhood street without a single witness. This was not just a kidnapping. The man behind that wheel was a serial killer. He had done this before, and the girls he had taken before Kara Robinson had never come home. But this time, he made one mistake that he would never get the chance to correct. He underestimated her. To understand what makes Kara's story so extraordinary, you have to understand who she was before that afternoon. Kara Robinson was 15 years old in the summer of 2002. She lived in Columbia, South Carolina, a mid-sized city with a small-town feel in many of its neighborhoods. She was a teenager with friends, a family that loved her, and the kind of ordinary summer ahead of her that felt like it would last forever. She was not a trained survivalist. She had not studied criminal psychology. She had not taken self-defense classes or read books about how to survive an abduction. She was a kid, a completely normal, everyday kid who had no reason to believe that her life was about to be shattered into before and after. June 24, 2002, started like any other day. She went to a friend's house nearby. The friend was not home yet, so Kara waited outside and decided to water the flowers in the yard. A small, generous act, and it put her in the wrong place at exactly the wrong moment. Or maybe, as the rest of her story will show, it put her exactly where she needed to be for the rest of the world to eventually learn the truth about a killer who had been hiding in plain sight. Richard Marc Evonitz was 37 years old on the day he abducted Kara Robinson. To most people who knew him, he seemed unremarkable. He held down jobs. He had relationships. He could make conversation and appear normal in social settings. He was the kind of person your mind slides right past because there is nothing obviously alarming about him. But underneath that ordinary surface, Evonitz was something else entirely. He was a predator who had been hunting for years. He had a gun. He had a plan. He had a container large enough to hold a person. And he had a destination already in mind. The abduction itself took less than 60 seconds. He pulled up. He approached. He pressed the weapon to her neck. He forced her into the container. He drove away. 60 seconds to destroy a life or so, he believed. He had no way of knowing that the girl in that container was already beginning to fight back in the only way available to her, with her mind. Inside that plastic box in the total darkness, with the heat pressing in and the van moving beneath her, Kara Robinson did not scream herself into exhaustion. She did not pound on the walls until her hands gave out. She did something that should honestly take your breath away when you think about it. She started counting. She started listening. Every time the van turned, she noted the direction. Every time it slowed down, she paid attention to the sounds outside: traffic, road noise, whether they were on a highway or a smaller street. She tracked the time. She built a mental map of a route she could not see. She was doing this while her adrenaline was at levels most people never experience in a lifetime. She was doing this while terrified, while cramped in a dark container, while not knowing whether she was going to live or die. And she was doing it deliberately. She was choosing to use her fear as fuel instead of letting it consume her. That decision, made in darkness, made alone, made at 15 years old, is one of the most remarkable acts of mental discipline in any true crime case you will ever hear about. When the van stopped, and Evonitz brought Kara inside his apartment in Lexington, South Carolina, the container of horrors she had been locked in gave way to a different kind of trap. Now she could see her surroundings. Now she could see him. And Kara Robinson, still operating on that same disciplined survival instinct, immediately began absorbing every single detail of that apartment. She noted the layout. She noted where the doors were, which direction they opened, what was near them. She noted the windows, whether they were accessible, what was outside them. She noticed the objects in the room. She noticed his behavior when he seemed anxious, when he seemed calm, when his attention was divided. She was cataloging everything, because she understood on some deep, unspoken level that information was the only thing she had. He had the gun, he had the locks, he had the physical advantage, but she could build something in her mind that he had no idea was happening. She was building her escape before she had any idea how it would happen. Over the next 18 hours, Kara endured things that no human being should ever be subjected to. Evonitz sexually assaulted her. He used restraints. He controlled her through the threat of force and through the slow, deliberate psychological manipulation that predators like him learn over time. But Kara never fully surrendered to it. Even in the worst moments, part of her mind was somewhere else, watching, filing, calculating. She managed to present a version of herself to Evonitz that kept her alive, not the terrified, shattered victim he expected, not the person who would make his crime easier by giving up. She interacted with him in a way that kept the situation from escalating to its worst possible conclusion. She was performing, in a sense performing survival, and the performance required more courage and more psychological strength than most adults will ever be tested on in their entire lives. There were moments during those 18 hours when Evonitz let his guard down, when he spoke to her, when he seemed to almost relax in her presence, which tells you something deeply disturbing about the psychology of men like him, the sense of ownership and control they feel, the way that certainty of power makes them careless. And Kara noticed those moments. She filed them away too, because somewhere in her mind, she was building toward a single point, a moment when the gap between his control and her freedom would be just wide enough to move through. She did not know when that moment would come, but she was going to be ready for it when it did. And then Evonitz fell asleep. That was the moment. Kara moved. With her hands still restrained, she worked carefully, methodically. She freed herself enough to move. She made her way through the apartment toward the front door. She opened it, and she ran, barefoot, into the night, down a street she had never seen before. In a city, she had only arrived inside a locked box. She ran until she reached a car on the road. She flagged it down. 2 young men stopped. She told them what had happened. They called 911. And in that moment, the 18-hour nightmare that Richard Marc Evonitz had designed to be invisible, to leave no trace and no witness, came crashing apart, because he had not accounted for the fact that the person he kidnapped would walk out his front door and go straight to the police with enough information to take him apart. What would you remember if your life depended on it? Think about that honestly. If you were locked in darkness right now, terrified, with no idea where you were being taken or what was going to happen to you, how much would your mind hold on to? Most people, even adults with years of experience, would struggle to recall reliable details under that kind of trauma. The mind under extreme fear does not work like a camera. It distorts. It fragments. It prioritizes emotional survival over factual recall. But Kara Robinson had somehow, instinctively, managed to override that. The information she gave to law enforcement was not vague or uncertain. It was precise. It was detailed. It was actionable. She described the route she believed they had taken. She described the apartment layout in ways that were immediately verifiable. She gave investigators a portrait of Evonitz's behavior, his apartment, and his methods that went far beyond what most adult witnesses are able to provide even under ideal conditions. Law enforcement who worked her case have described her account as one of the most remarkable they had ever received from a crime victim. Within hours of Kara's escape, investigators had Richard Marc Evonitz identified. They went to his apartment. They collected evidence, and what they found there began to connect threads that law enforcement in a different state had been desperately trying to connect for years. Because Evonitz's crimes did not begin with Kara. They ended with her. Between 1996 and 1997, 3 girls had vanished from Spotsylvania County in Virginia. Sophia Silva was 16 years old when she disappeared in September of 1996. Kristen Lisk was 15, and her younger sister Kathy was 12 when they were taken in May of 1997. All 3 girls were murdered. Their cases had been open for years. Their families had lived in a horror that had no shape, no face, and no answers. Law enforcement had investigated. Tips had come in and gone cold. The cases had haunted the investigators who worked them. And then Kara Robinson ran out of her front door in Lexington, South Carolina, and gave the investigation the piece it had been missing all along. DNA evidence collected from Evonitz's apartment linked him conclusively to all 3 Virginia murders. The man who had taken Kara was the same man who had taken Sophia, Kristen, and Kati. He had the same methods, the same preparation, the same careful, controlled approach. The only difference was that this time his victim had refused to be a victim. She had survived, and her survival did not just save her own life. It broke open 3 cold cases and gave 3 families the answers they had been living without for years. That is the weight of what Kara Robinson did when she ran out of that door. She did not just escape. She became the turning point in a story that had been destroying lives long before she was ever pulled into it. When Evonitz realized that Kara had escaped and that law enforcement was moving toward him, he ran. He fled south and made it to Sarasota, Florida, where his sister lived. Sarasota police tracked him down. When officers approached, Richard Marc Evonitz pulled out a gun and shot himself. He died on June 27, 2002, just 3 days after he had abducted Kara Robinson. He never stood before a judge. He never answered for Sophia, Kristen, or Kati in a courtroom. He never gave their families the chance to face him and speak their truth into the record. In the way that the justice system measures outcomes, his death left those families with a verdict, but no trial, with answers but no accountability. That absence, the thing that a trial would have given them, and never could, is one of the quiet wounds that lives on for families in cases like these. The monster was gone, but the grief had nowhere to go except inward. In the aftermath, investigators pieced together as much of Evonitz's history as they could. He had served in the United States Navy. He had been married. He had worked regular jobs in the years surrounding his crimes. He had lived among people who had no idea what he was. His neighbors described him as quiet. His co-workers found him ordinary. That is the most disturbing thing about predators like Richard Marc Evonitz. Not the violence itself, as unimaginable as it is, but the normalcy that surrounds it. The way they move through the world without detection, the way they are embedded in communities, driving down streets, living in apartment complexes, standing in line at grocery stores, looking exactly like everyone else. The only way they are ever exposed is when something goes wrong for them. And in this case, what went wrong was Kara Robinson. The families of Sophia Silva, Kristen Lisk, and Kati Lisk responded to the news in the complicated, painful way that families in their position always must. There was relief that they finally knew, that the years of not knowing, of imagining every possible horror, and not being able to confirm or deny any of it, were finally over. But relief and grief are not mutually exclusive. They sit alongside each other in the human heart, and the grief does not shrink just because the mystery is solved. Those families had raised daughters. Those daughters had been robbed of futures. Nothing that Kara Robinson's survival revealed could undo that. But knowing matters. Being able to bury the uncertainty along with everything else that matters. And it was Kara who gave them that. In the years since 2002, Kara Robinson Chamberlain has built a life that is remarkable in its fullness. She married a law enforcement officer. She became a mother. She became an advocate for crime victims, specifically for young women and girls who find themselves in the machinery of a legal and social system that does not always treat them with the seriousness and dignity they deserve. She has spoken publicly about her experience, including in media interviews and through advocacy work. And she has done so not because it is easy. She has been honest about the cost of revisiting trauma repeatedly for the sake of public awareness, but because she believes it matters, because she knows that her story reaches people, that it changes how they think about what survival looks like, that it challenges the narrative that victims are passive, that young girls are helpless, that predators always win. She has spoken honestly about the trauma that did not simply end when she escaped that apartment. Trauma is not a door that closes behind you. It follows you into sleep. It surfaces in ordinary moments without warning. It reshapes your relationship to safety and trust in ways that take years of work to understand and navigate. Kara has been open about that reality, and in being open about it, she has done something important. She has made space for other survivors to be honest about their own experiences without shame. She survived something that most people cannot fully imagine, and she has used that survival to become something more than a statistic, more than a headline, more than a case file number. She has become a voice that carries weight, because it was earned in the hardest possible way. There is a detail about Kara's story that gets discussed in law enforcement and criminal psychology contexts that is worth pausing on. The level of cognitive function she maintained during her captivity, the observation, the memory, the strategic thinking represents something that researchers who study trauma and survival find genuinely significant. Under extreme fear, the human brain typically narrows its focus to immediate physical survival, fight or flight. The higher order thinking, the kind that builds mental maps and observes behavioral patterns and plans for future contingencies, tends to shut down under that kind of stress. Kara did not let it shut down. Whether that was conscious or instinctive or some combination of both, she maintained access to a kind of thinking that most people lose access to the moment true danger appears. And that is not just impressive. In the context of her story, it is the difference between living and not living. Kara Robinson Chamberlain was 15 years old in a plastic box in the back of a van. She was 15 years old in an apartment with a serial killer who had already taken 3 lives. She was 15 years old when she made the decision to run, and everything that followed, the solved cases, the answers for grieving families, the prevention of future crimes that Evonitz would certainly have continued to commit, all of it flows from that one girl making that one decision in that one moment. It is the kind of thing that makes you reconsider what courage actually means. We talk about courage like it is something performed in public, something that gets witnessed and applauded. But real courage, the deepest kind, happens in the dark, when no one is watching, when there is no guarantee that it will work, when the cost of trying and failing is everything. That is the kind of courage Kara Robinson had, and she had it at 15. Do you think most people could stay that calm in a moment like that? It is not a rhetorical question. It is one of the most honest things her story asks us to consider. Because most of us will never know. Most of us will live our entire lives without ever being tested the way she was. And maybe that is something to be quietly, deeply grateful for. But for those who do get tested, for those who find themselves in moments where the only thing between them and the worst outcome is the quality of their own thinking under pressure, Kara Robinson's story is more than inspiration. It is a reminder that the human mind is capable of extraordinary things, even when, maybe especially when, everything around it is trying to make it fail. If her story stayed with you, if it made you feel something, if you think it deserves to be heard, leave a comment below. Tell me what you would have tried to remember. Hit the like button if this kind of storytelling matters to you, and subscribe, because the next story is already waiting, and it is one you will not want to miss.